This lesson in our series of counseling courses is entitled Creating Positive Communication. Another one of my favorite stories is about the man who noticed one day that his wife wouldn't say anything. She wouldn't answer his questions or respond to his requests. He finally took her to a psychiatrist. After the couple was seated in his office, the psychiatrist noticed that the man's wife would not look up and seemed to be very sad. He asked the husband what he could do to help. The husband replied, "Well, Doc, my wife seems to be depressed. She won't say anything and she just mopes around the house all the time. I don't know what's wrong with her." The psychiatrist surveyed the situation for a moment and then went over to the woman. He smiled at her and told her how much he appreciated her. She began to perk up. Then he held her hand and told her how pretty she was, and she began to smile. He then reached over and gave her a kiss on the cheek and hugged her. She just beamed in response. When the psychiatrist returned to his desk, he asked the husband if he saw what happened when he walked over and told his wife how much he appreciated her. The husband replied, "Yeah, I saw that." Then the psychiatrist said, "Did you see how she smiled when I held her hand and told her how pretty she looked?" The husband replied, "Yeah, I saw that too." "Did you see how she beamed when I kissed her on the cheek and hugged her?" "I certainly did see that," said the husband. "That is what she needs at least 3 times a week," said the psychiatrist. The husband scratched his head, thought for a moment, then said, "Well, Doc, I can only bring her in on Tuesdays and Thursdays during the week, but Saturdays are my golf days." This is a funny hypothetical story, but it has a message for all of us. Positive communication is communication that cares. When we care what other people are saying and we validate their feelings, we are creating positive communication. To validate is to give credibility to the feelings of the other person communicating with you, even if you don't agree with them. It doesn't require agreement, just the acknowledgement of the validity of that person's feelings. It is a fact that poor communication is the #1 leadership and management problem. Once understanding breaks down, unity, commitment, motivation, and group activity are lost and the group fails. This is even more of a fact if we see the church as an organism rather than an organization. Both organisms and organizations have a common goal, and the members all work towards that goal. The difference is that an organization does not require that the members work together, but an organism requires that the members be interdependent. The church is an organism, 1 Corinthians 12 through 27. Good communication is even more important in an organism. The family structure is basically an organism, and positive communication is vital to the family for it to be functional as opposed to dysfunctional. A lack of communicating in positive and caring ways is a major defect in dysfunctional families. In most communication, there are communication blocks. The Bible gives us instructions on how to create positive communication, Ephesians 4:29 through 32. We learn from birth to adulthood how to communicate ideas and concepts and how to persuade and negotiate. We will learn positive ways to do this if our parents teach and model communication that cares. Unfortunately, we also learn how to distort and confuse our communications so that we do not have to deal with issues head-on. Communication distortions are designed to hide from, deflect attention from, hurt or humiliate the other person. It is also important to realize that each communication distortion is preceded by equally distorted thinking. The following are ways to change distorted communications. Sensitize your mind to be able to recognize the distortions when they appear in your thinking and communication. Number 2, confront each distortion that you recognize and challenge its truthfulness and accuracy. Number 3, replace each distorted thought with a truthful and accurate message. Number 4, the most difficult but most important part is to communicate the truthful and accurate message to the other person, along with an appropriate apology for the distorted message and for whatever hurt or damage it might have caused in your relationship. Remember that all confused or misunderstood communication involves some form of communication distortion. The following are some common communication distortions. Number one, tunnel vision. This is when you see only what fits your attitude or state of mind. Thus, you seize on a single, small detail and make that the basis for your overall interpretation. Other important details are deleted or censored from your awareness. Number two, absolute statements. Absolute statements contain absolute words such as always or never or can't, etc. These are used to make the argument or statement stronger, but because they are seldom ever true, such statements weaken the truth and are often used to avoid responsibility. These kinds of statements categorize events as awful or terrible, whereas in reality, its implications are only mild or moderate. Number three, polarized thinking. In this kind of thinking, everything is black or white, good or bad, with no other possible explanations in between. Sometimes called all or nothing thinking, where a person sees only two extreme choices by thinking this way. This thinking seems to have its advantages because you don't have to expend the mental energy to find other options besides the two polarized ones. Number four, shoulds and oughts. This form of distortion is when a person operates from a list of inflexible rules about how you or other people should act. There is a feeling of rigidity and controlling with this distortion. It also sets people up for unrealistic expectations that, when unfulfilled, cause frustration and anger. Number five, mind reading. Mind reading can operate in two directions. The first is when you believe that you can tell what the other person is thinking. The second is when you expect the other person to know what you are thinking, wanting, or expecting. Again, it sets us up for unrealistic expectations that distort communication and disrupt relationships. Number six, subjective versus objective reasoning. When a person allows himself to get caught up in subjective reasoning, he becomes a slave of his own emotions. He then can become convinced that any time a person feels an emotion strongly, it must be justified and therefore acted upon. Subjectivism does not allow for a standard of authority except the feelings of a person. The Bible is the Christian standard of authority, and we must recognize that our feelings may not agree with its teachings. In such a case, feelings cannot be trusted. Objectivity allows for questioning one's feelings against the facts or a standard of authority. And finally, personalization. This distortion is a form of paranoia, inasmuch as the person believes that the actions of other people are directed towards him in a negative way. This is an attitude that reflects a person's insecurities. When we have low self-worth or feel inadequate, we have a tendency to personalize what other people say to us, and it then causes us to feel defensive and vengeful. Such distortions are destructive to healthy relationships and tend to create the feeling of alienation. The following, then, are 5 basic rules of communication that can aid us in evaluating how we communicate to others so they and we can understand. Number 1, be willing to listen and understand others. James 1:19 and 20. Number 2, be willing to compromise, not on basic convictions, in areas of interpretations, assumptions, and expectations. James 3:13 through 18. Number 3, be willing to validate the feelings of others. Romans 15:7. Number 4, be willing to be vulnerable with your feelings. James 5:6 through 10. And number 5, be willing to admit when you are wrong and apologize. James 5:16. In his best-selling book, Men Are From Mars, Women Are From Venus, John Gray has successfully made the point that men and women think differently and communicate differently. He states that men are motivated when they feel needed and women are motivated when they feel cherished. He concludes that when men talk about problems, they instinctively offer solutions, but when women talk about problems, they primarily want to be validated. Women are more relationship-oriented and men are more goal-oriented. It is interesting that the Bible implores men to love their wives and that wives should respect their husbands, Ephesians 5:22 through 33. I have found in my ministry that men have the hardest time expressing love to their wives, and women have the hardest time showing respect to their husbands. The Bible says, husbands, in the same way, be considerate as you live with your wives, and treat them with respect as the weaker partner, and as heirs with you of the gracious gift of life, so that nothing will hinder your prayers. 1 Peter 3:7. Peter's not saying that women are weaker morally or intellectually, but are generally weaker physically and should be cherished and protected. My experience has proven to me that a man feels masculine when he is respected, depended upon, looked up to, and thought positively of. A woman feels feminine when she is loved, cared for, protected, and understood. Medical studies have shown that between the 18th and 26th week of pregnancy, something happens that separates the sexes in a way that forever affects communication between them. Researchers have actually observed a chemical, testosterone, and other sex-related hormones released over a baby boy's brain. This causes changes that happen only to a baby boy. The sex-related hormones and chemicals that cover the baby boy's brain cause the right side to recede somewhat from the left side. One result is that in most cases, a boy starts life more left brain oriented. This means that girls start life more right brain oriented than boys, or more two-sided in their thinking. We do know that the left brain houses more of the logical, analytical, factual, and aggressive centers of thought. This is why men are usually more logical, organized, and aggressive in their thinking, and women are more centered on feelings, language, pictures, fine detailed work, and intuitive thinking. It is quite evident that this can cause communication blocks. There are some natural implications in communication between men and women which at times destroy the validating process. John Gray concludes that men are fulfilled through working out the details of a problem, and women are fulfilled through talking about the problem. Validating is the most difficult process in communication for men. Men like to feel that they have the right answers and have a difficult time validating a woman's feelings when they disagree with them. As stated before, validation does not require agreement with someone else's feelings. It only requires that those feelings be recognized as valid to that person. We must understand that communication requires openness. Rarely do two people talk openly about their reactions to each other. Most of us withhold our feelings about people, even in relations that are very important or dear to us. Because we fear hurting them, making them angry, or being respected or rejected by them, because we don't know how to be open and sensitive, we say nothing. They are then totally unaware of our reactions to them. Likewise, we continue to be ignorant of how our behavior affects other people. As a result, many relationships that could be productive and enjoyable gradually fall under the accumulated load of tiny annoyances, feelings, and misunderstandings that were never talked about openly. Openness must stem from a desire to improve our relationship with others. Openness is not an end in itself, but a means to an end. When attempting to elicit an open sharing of reactions to each other, try to convey that you value your relationship and wish to improve it because it is important. We need to strive to know what the other person perceives and feels about our actions and to share what we perceive about theirs. In the process of communication, there must be a willingness to be open to the possibility of risk. Communicating with others usually involves risk. Your willingness to risk your self-esteem, being rejected or hurt by others, etc., depends on the importance of the relationship to you. Likewise, you cannot expect others to not become angry or feel hurt by your comments. Although this discussion may become intense, spirited, angry, or tearful, it should not be coercive or an attempt to force others to change. Each person should use the information as he sees fit. The attitude should not be to make sure that you win the argument, but what can each of us learn from this discussion that will make our working together more productive and more satisfying. Reactions should be shared as close to the behavior that aroused them as possible so that the other will know exactly what behavior is being discussed. For example, behavior during the encounter itself can be commented on. I feel pushed away when you say those things to me. Disturbing situations should be discussed as they occur rather than saving up massive accumulations of hurt feelings and annoyances and dumping them on the other all at one time. There should be a timeout called by one or the other to allow time for feelings to cool and evaluation as to what needs to be said for clarification. This is when iMessages are vitally important. They allow you the opportunity to be non-accusative, express your feelings, and take responsibility for those feelings. Be sure to paraphrase the other's comments about you to make sure you understand him as he intends, and check to make sure that he understands you as you intend. When it comes to counseling, communication is vitally important, and so is the development of a counseling plan. As a counselor, you need to present yourself as a serious counselor by setting appointments, as is done in professional offices, and it will increase the counselee's respect for you and enhance your communication with him. Set aside a few minutes to prepare for a counseling interview and avoid the appearance of being interrupted or unprepared. It is important that a counselor practice good physical hygiene and dress appropriately before each counseling session. The following are suggested ways to prepare for a counseling session. Number one, your time is valuable, so don't waste it. Ephesians 5:15 and 16. Number two, the counselor time is also important to consider. Number three, because each case is different, handle it differently time-wise. Number four, let the time with a counselee be determined by the degree of progress. The conventional wisdom is that 50 minutes to an hour per session per week is sufficient. Number five, set a time limit of approximately 10 to 15 weeks for completion of the counseling program. This aids in the process of closure. Number six, all counseling series must come to an end. The counselor needs to plan a closing interview when it is evident that there is no need to continue further in the process or a referral is necessary. Number seven, the counselor needs to prepare the counselee for the time when the counseling process will end. The counselor is effective when he convinces his counselees that they are responsible for using the tools and skills they have learned and will use the rest of their lives. Counseling is a process, and it requires time and a plan to be effective. The following are steps you can take as a counselor that will be helpful. Number one, have a counselee fill out an information form with specific questions in reference to date of birth, marriage, occupation, education, family members, examples of abuse, physical, sexual, or substance, and a family history of relationship with parents. Number two, it takes time for both the counselor and the counselee to understand the problem. Therefore, be patient. Number three, the counselee may see the symptoms but fail to grasp the significance of the problem. Therefore, don't depend on his or her assessment. Number four, learn to depend on the power of God in the process. God's power is needed in order to change lives. Pray daily for yourself and your counselees. 1 Thessalonians 5:16 through 18. Number five, allow 1 or 2 sessions to diagnose the problem and determine if a referral is necessary. The following are ways then to discover and follow a unique counseling pattern. Number one, use a personality temperament analysis profile in diagnosing the problem. Do so under the advisement of a professional counselor. Number two, provide an atmosphere conducive to privacy, uninterrupted. Number three, encourage the counselee to express himself/herself freely. Number four, reflect and restate what the counselee says for clarification. Number five, do not register surprise at anything said by the counselee. Number six, refrain from censoring or judging, Romans 15:7. Number seven, encourage the counselee to suggest his or her own answers. Number eight, maintain a confidential attitude toward what is discussed. Number nine, require the counselee to journal his or her thoughts, feelings, and behavior. Number 10, give the counselee homework to keep him/her involved in the process between sessions. Number 11, avoid attitudes of labeling, condemning, blaming, and rejecting. Number 12, when recommending solutions, be willing to use the Bible as your standard of authority. And now the following list will help the counselor to be professional and confidential. Be cautious, both publicly and privately, when handling confidential information, which should be kept in a locked storage unit. Do not talk about other counselors or counselees. Counsel in appropriate places, such as an office that is private and allows for security and confidentiality, in order to control distractions, with someone nearby to provide monitoring. The following are recommended techniques in counseling that provide a positive and effective interview with the counselee. Number 1, give the counselee your undivided attention. Number 2, develop good listening skills. Number 3, look for vital pieces of information that will help you diagnose the problem, and look cautiously into the counselee's past for clues. Number 4, concentrate on listening and asking questions to clarify thought. Number 5, avoid asking questions with yes or no answers. Number 6, ask questions that require answers that are informative and relative to the problem. Number 7, ask questions such as the following. When were you aware of the problem? Or, what did you feel when you recognized the problem? Or, how would you describe the problem? Another, where else have you looked for help? Or, how has your family responded to the problem? Another, how has the problem impacted your life? Or, what do you think could be a possible solution to the problem? And another, how have you tried to cope with it? Do not endanger, number 8, the relationship by trying to force information out of the counselee. Number 9, allow the counselee to develop at a pace according to his comfort level. Number 10, take notes at each session, recording the presenting problem and all pertinent information revealed by the counselee. This one is a problem for counselors at times, especially those who have not counseled much before. The idea of the presenting problem many times is something that the counselor has to realize is not always the real problem. When a counselee comes into the office or the place of counseling, they are usually caught up in what we call a presenting problem. It's the problem that seems to be the most pressing, the most difficult. And yet in reality, when we probe into what's going on in that counselee's life, we find out that the presenting problem is really just a symptom, and that there's a more deeper problem that needs to be found and diagnosed. And when we do that, we have to realize the sensitivities that are here. The counselee may resist our probing into a deeper problem. The counselee may be hiding that deeper problem and not wanting to in any way reveal it. And so as counselors, we have to be sensitive to the feelings of the counselee. And as we try to probe and try to find out information, we must be sure that we have a close relationship with that counselee to the point where they believe us, that we're credible to them, and they feel like they can trust us. And sometimes we may take more than one session to reach into the counselor's past and discover the real problem. But most of all, we need to realize that the counselee must trust us. We must create an atmosphere that is conducive to them revealing their innermost thoughts and feelings. An atmosphere that is non-threatening, so that we can truly get to the problem and get beyond the presenting problem and be able to diagnose and to treat the real problem and to help the counselee to a spiritual, emotional, and physical health. So then, when it comes to diagnosing the problem, we as counselors need to realize that feelings are to the counselor what symptoms are to the medical doctor. The counselor needs to provide the counselee with a supportive environment in which the counselee can feel free to express his or her feelings. The purpose of expressing feelings is to help locate and diagnose the problem. And observing body language is also important in the process of determining the problem. Counselees are often motivated to seek help because of strong emotions like prolonged sadness, emptiness, guilt, inadequacy, shame, anger, hurt, fear, anxiety, and confusion. The counselor should not try to convince the counselee that he or she should not feel that way. Validation is very important at this point. The open sharing of feelings is a healing process in itself. The sharing of feelings by the counselee helps to put things in perspective, to identify the problem and the belief systems that are causing the dysfunctional behavior. The counselor needs to realize that feelings are neither right nor wrong, but they do reflect the emotional and psychological needs of the counselee. These needs must be met both psychologically and spiritually. Above all else, the counselor must be concerned about the needs of the counselee, not his own needs, his own pride, or his success in helping others. He needs to have the heart of a servant and the mind of Christ. Thank you.